Well, welcome everyone. It's great to be speaking with you all, and it's especially nice to be here on this panel with a couple of longtime friends of mine who are know all about litigating in the time of COVID. I'm Daryl Joseffer. As you can see below, I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Counsel here at the U.S. Chambers Litigation Center. Obviously, we work with a lot of firms, and we know a lot about litigating during COVID because we litigate, and it's during COVID. Same is true for both Andy Clubok and Jeff Bucholtz as well. Andy is the Global Chair of Securities Litigation at Latham Watkins, but he really handles all types of commercial litigation. So much so that last year, 360 named him its MVP for trials on the year, which was very well deserved. Jeff Bucholtz is a partner at my old law firm, King Spalding. He handles mostly appellate and legal issues in both federal and state courts. He's argued everywhere from the U.S. Supreme Court to any smaller venues as well. But he, before being at King Spalding, he spent years at the in various leadership roles in the Justice Department, including being the acting assistant AG for the Civil Division. So with that to the side, Andy and Jeff, welcome. Thanks for talking to us today about what you do for a living. And Andy, could we start you off? You had one of the trials that actually spanned the beginning. It started before the pandemic really set in, ended after everyone had been sent home. What was that like?
Well, it was interesting. First of all, let me just say thank you, Daryl. Thanks to ILR for having Jeff and I here today. Thanks to Layla Ali. I could have listened to her for the rest of the day. So appreciate you taking some time from that to talk to us. We had a case that started in February, late February, or mid-February, I guess, of 2020, which seems like 10 years ago. But it was a bench trial, went on about 5 weeks, and it finished was in the Southern District of New York, and it finished just as things really all turned crazy with the NBA and others canceling and everybody sort of abandoning ship in mid-March to create the new pandemic life. We had just finished the case. We did not have closing arguments yet. We delayed for a couple of weeks to see what would happen. And then we got this idea to try this new technology, Zoom, to do closing arguments. It was reported it was the first trial in the country to have Zoom. There was some fun stories about it. And so that was interesting. I will say from that very first experience, it turned out it was lucky. We had a client who had made us use this crazy Zoom technology earlier that year, and it was kind of fun and cool, and we went through all the growing pains with it, which we thought we had a competitive advantage on until now everyone's caught up to us. But in that first trial, really people didn't know what to do. This was an instance where we'd had a pretty hard-fought trial. The opposing counsel, was the typical, but maybe even more so, motions back and forth and accusations and so forth. But we said, hey, look, we got to do this together. We will help you. How about if our tech team talks to your tech team and we'll all work together to make sure this goes smoothly? They said, no way. We don't want it. We've got our own tech team. We're better. We don't need that help. And sure enough, in this first Zoom closing argument, their technology failed. They didn't have the mic cut out. There was all kinds of glitches to the point where the judge was saying over and over again, can somebody tell him we can't hear him? And finally, I had to call him on his phone because he was in there delivering a terrific closing argument for about 5 or 7 minutes when no one could hear it. But we worked through those glitches, and we ended up winning the case. Not just because of the technical smoothness, but it certainly is the kind of thing. It's those kinds of small things that I think we've all now learned over the last year and a half that you really got to get nailed down so that you can focus on the big stuff.
Yeah, certainly. What are trials? I mean, for both Andy and Jeff, both of you, what are trials like now? Whether it's in person or virtual. How is it? What's it like in the new world?
Well, I mean, it varies a lot by jurisdiction. There are some courts that are open more or less with varying degrees of vaccination requirements or negative test requirements or the like. Other courts are doing things virtually, and it really depends. I mean, I was talking to a partner the other day who was sitting in court in a state court in Florida, sitting there in court examining a witness who was on a screen somewhere else, and everyone was wearing a mask, including the witness on the screen, because I guess there was someone else in the room with her. So it was sort of like the worst of all worlds, where you're in person in court in a group environment in ways that some people are not comfortable with and may raise risks, but you're also dealing with technology and examining someone who isn't there in front of you. So that's one anecdote, but there's lots of other courts where things seem to be going more smoothly, through either a combination of successful technology or simply just being in person. And hopefully, as we get more past the pandemic, more courts will be able to reopen more fully. But so far, I think it's really a mixed bag, and often, frankly, kind of a mess. But I don't know, Andy, maybe you've had better experiences.
I think it's right. It's a mix, and it's going to continue to be a mix, and probably vary across the country as there are variations in how different areas are handling the pandemic. We've had very successful, very smooth, entirely virtual trials now. Not just the closing argument, but since that first experience, full trials. We've had experiences in court where everyone's had to wear masks, or there's been lots of plexiglass shield and very limited number of people that you could bring into the courtroom, which changes things a little bit. In one case, we tend to like to have shadow juries, and we've used them very successfully. That's been out the window in some cases where they limit the spectators in the courtroom. And then we had a case recently at our firm in the Eastern District of Texas where there were just 6 jurors. One of them had a positive COVID test, led to a mistrial in the middle of the case. And so I think, you really have to be ready to roll with the punches and be sort of prepared for anything and expect the unexpected.
And just to pick up on that, I guess in terms of rolling with the punches and being prepared for the unexpected and being able to deal with it, my perception is that there's particular difficulties for smaller businesses, right? I mean, large companies that can afford larger teams of lawyers with more investment in technology may be pretty well equipped to handle some of these challenges, maybe better than some of their opponents. But not everyone has all those resources. Not everyone has all those opportunities and advantages. And I think, something to watch going forward is as maybe there becomes some new normals in terms of technology. Does that disadvantage any small businesses in particular? We'll see.
I think that's a great point. And just to be very candid, a firm like King Spalding, right? If you have a firm like that, it's handling trial, you guys are going to do it right. You're going to do everything right. You're going to take care of all the little stuff. And those kinds of differences in law firms that and clients that really can just afford to pay whatever it takes to really get everything right. I think that you're seeing those differences exacerbated, right? Whatever, you certainly hope in our justice system that it's not about who has necessarily even the best lawyers or spends the most money in the trial, but both sides get to present their cases and the truth comes out. That's not always the way it works, obviously, in practice. And to the extent you have a really, capable and very exacting trial team, I think you start to see even more differences when you have all the more ways that things can go wrong. And that's where a lot of times in trials, something goes wrong. You have some great thing you're trying to do, but there's a technical glitch, it goes wrong, maybe you get confused by some objections, and you just drop something that's really important. And I think that risks like that are, as Jeff was alluding to, are even greater probably now with the additional technological challenges that you've got to be constantly thinking about and overcoming.
Absolutely. So I assume at this point, if you had your druthers, would you rather be in court, which I would guess, or do you prefer virtual for at least some cases?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I've done a lot of appellate oral arguments virtually during the pandemic, and there's some advantages, I think, to appellate oral arguments. I think there's been a lot of press attention to the U.S. Supreme Court and the way they've changed their oral argument practice during the pandemic, and now more recently with this hybrid where they're the arguing lawyer and maybe one other person is in the courtroom, but they've adapted their practices in ways that I actually think make oral argument better there. An appellate oral argument is much easier to do virtually than a jury trial, to state the obvious. And I've had some appellate oral arguments that I've thought have gone better virtually than they might have in person. In person, it's easy for people to talk over each other. And maybe there's a bit more of an ability to run things in a more orderly way virtually, because virtually it doesn't work if you talk over people. And so maybe people are more conscious of that and more careful to avoid it. Avoiding the travel and other costs and complications of oral argument, and just being able to practice, to prepare for it in your own home, and not have to worry about, is your plane going to get canceled? I think is kind of an advantage. Jury trials, I think, is a different story. I haven't talked to anybody who's done a virtual jury trial who is looking forward to doing another virtual jury trial. But appellate oral arguments, I think maybe there's some technological adaptations that were necessary during the pandemic that hopefully will be carried forward even when they're not necessary.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's obviously a difference. Frankly, in an appellate argument, you can really have a very one-on-one conversation with Zoom. And the other thing you can do in an appellate argument that's on a video, or let alone telephonically, is you can phone a friend, you can get a lifeline. It's a lot easier to pass notes either literally or virtually when you're here on a screen. I could have a screen set up with a long set of chats with all sorts of folks on my team telling me, cite this case, say this, make this argument, fix your hair, whatever. Obviously that kind of lifeline doesn't exist when you're standing up there on the podium in front of three judges staring at you and your team's behind you, at counsel table. And so in that sense, it's better. And I think even more so, that's particularly better for younger lawyers. And I think what you get there is a real opportunity that I think we really tried to take advantage of, which is it's a lot safer to entrust a younger lawyer with an appellate argument or any argument in a district court or otherwise, if there is a little bit of a lifeline. If it is the case that if you have to, you can sneak a note, or you can put something up on the chat screen, or you can, give them a virtual kick under the table that you might not necessarily be able to do live. And I think we've really seen a significant increase in clients being willing to give younger attorneys an opportunity, and I think even more confidence of some of us more senior folks being happy to do that because you have a little bit of a backstop.
That's a very good point, Andy. I was reminded, one other thing you don't have to worry about virtually is one of my first arguments was out in the District of Michigan, and you were there, Andy, a long time ago. But we got there and I was all excited and poured myself a glass of water, and then next thing you know, I spread the water, I dumped the water all over the counsel table. And fortunately, they were early enough, got it cleaned up before the judge came in. But I guess you can't. I was just thinking of that as one thing that would not happen virtually, I assume.
Well, not exactly. Although there certainly are the things that can go wrong. And my partner was just telling me about an argument she had in the California Court of Appeals recently, where the opposing counsel was a telephonic argument. The opposing counsel accidentally must have clicked off his phone or something. All of a sudden, his line went dark, and right in the middle of his argument. And the presiding judge kept calling for him. The clerk started texting him. He had a cell phone. Everybody was trying to reach the person to let him know he wasn't on. And finally, the judge said, if he doesn't get on in 30 seconds, we're just going to take this case as submitted. We're midway through the argument. And all of a sudden, my partner, everybody in the courtroom hears the lawyer back on going, "Oh, please God, oh, please God." And the judge, without skipping a beat, says, "I'm not God, but we are pleased that you're back." And then they continue the argument. So certainly that's probably worse in some ways than the slip in the water, drop in the water. But those kinds of things we've all got stories like that.
That is funny. Well, Jeff mentioned the Supreme Court. We should turn back to witnesses in a bit, but Jeff mentioned the Supreme Court, and which has been fascinating. But Andy, you had one of your partners had one of the first virtual arguments last year, right? Ramon Martinez, one of your cases.
Right. I for some reason we got lucky with the first closing argument by Zoom and one of the first Supreme Court arguments that was sort of infamous. Speaking of things worse than spilling water, this was the argument that during my partner Ramon Martinez's argument, there was an audible flushing noise, which is not something you really want to hear when you're arguing, and it was obviously embarrassing. The way they do in the Supreme Court is they don't have video, but they put your picture up while you're arguing. So his face is up there. Ramon Martinez, very appropriate looking, very solemn looking picture as he's arguing an important case in the Supreme Court. Actually, a major case involved the TCPA that affects probably half the folks in this room. Had a First Amendment argument about it. And while he's arguing it, all of a sudden there's this flushing noise. That picture, though, his picture's up, and he had nothing to do obviously with the flushing. He's in the middle of arguing. In fact, he was in our office. But that got picked up by all the late night comics, and all of them made fun of this flushing noise, and his face is forever associated with it. There was a little true crime detective effort afterwards to figure out which justice did it, and there was a whole cottage industry about folks trying to guess who it was, and I think they had a prime suspect that I probably shouldn't say, but it rhymes with fire.
Yeah, it's been interesting, but what I really like about the current Supreme Court arguments, though, is that advocates really do get more of a chance to actually talk. With the reform, when they realize that they kind of just have the normal free-for-all virtually, it's been fascinating how advocates are getting more of a chance to make their points. The justices are less eager to interrupt one another. And one of the things I want to talk about is lessons learned going forward and how this is carrying over. Because now that the Supreme Court's back in the courtroom, it does seem like they've decided that the virtual way wasn't so bad in some respects, and so I'm hoping that that continues to carry over. But we were talking. Let's go back to witnesses, which I think is really interesting. Either depositions or at trial. Obviously, you'd rather have a witness in person, I would assume. How is that going with trying to get witnesses to appear?
Well, I'll say that we used to sometimes have a videotape deposition as an option, and I would say I would have flown anywhere in the world to avoid doing a videotape deposition. They were always a mess. It was always capable. There was always games being played, and the witnesses counsel would be there, and you never know what communications are happening, and it just never ever was close to as effective. With Zoom, I will say that it's quite a bit different, particularly if everybody really is on Zoom, and if you don't have counsel there. We developed sort of a set of protocols to make witnesses attest to under oath that they would not be getting notes. There is no, depositions aren't not take-home exams or situations where you can phone a friend. So that was not a situation where it was okay, or it is okay, for a lawyer to pass a note. We required folks to attest that was not happening. We also developed a mechanism for having pre-packaged witness kits where we would individually wrap. You want to surprise people sometimes with which documents you're going to use, but if you try to put it up on the screen, somehow they can't see it. Can you scroll? And they end up wasting half the time with that. So we put together prepackaged witness kits where we'd have each exhibit prepackaged. It takes some advanced planning. It takes tracking down the witness and making sure that you have plenty of advance notice to get a messenger to their house, and then on screen you actually watch them open the envelope, so they don't know what exhibits are going to be used ahead of time, even though they've got them all sitting there. So there are things like that can streamline it. I still vastly prefer. I'd say I still prefer live depositions, but it's probably not as vast a difference anymore because we've developed a lot of ways to take into account things, and frankly, the technology is so much better. I do think going forward, we're going to use video depths or Zoom depths quite a bit more than we used to use the old traditional video depths, because it does save a lot of money, and for lots of witnesses, it's it's just as good, or certainly maybe not worth the difference.
I assume there's still plenty of gamesmanship going on with, witnesses not wanting to appear in person and, maybe invoking COVID as an excuse or whatnot. How is that all playing out?
Yeah, definitely seen some of that. Of course, there was gamesmanship before, but
Sure.
Now there's new technological opportunities for gamesmanship to occur. And so, you could have a witness who says, well, I'm afraid to fly. I'm afraid to do an in-person deposition because of COVID. And, you need to respect that, because sometimes it's sincere, sometimes it's not. And, you end up you agree to do the deposition by virtual means. And then lo and behold, the witness shows up and there's, 3 lawyers in the room with the witness after the witness has said that, that they're not comfortable being in a room with anybody. And so, there's definitely opportunities for manipulation and gamesmanship. I think, what Andy just described in terms of prepackaged witness kits is one way to combat some types of gamesmanship. But, our opponents on the other side of cases will always look for opportunities for gamesmanship, and technology issues and COVID travel issues have created some opportunities, unfortunately.
Yeah, I hate to be cynical, but it may surprise some of you in the audience to know that some lawyers will take advantage of anything that they can. I think the one issue that's now really starting to play out, and I've seen recently some interesting things about, is what to do about vaccines and vaccine mandates. And obviously, the attitude towards vaccines and vaccine mandates in particular is different, varies, can be quite a bit state to state. And we've seen that play out in different ways, both in terms of legitimate concerns, I think, and some of the gamesmanship. We had a deposition that was scheduled in Texas, and when you take a deposition, you always want to take the deposition at your own office or your local counsel's office if you don't have an office in that jurisdiction, because it's just having the documents there, being able to quickly pull up stuff from your document management system, being able to quickly make copies, having your own space to prepare ahead of time and be all set up. That is invaluable. That really makes a significant difference. It's not a small thing, frankly. And so when you're taking depositions, you always want to take it in your home turf if you can. And I had a situation where there was a question about whether everyone was vaccinated in this particular local counsel's office, and the opposing party tried to use that as an excuse to shift the deposition to their office. And we went through some back and forth, and we ultimately reached some. So, and then it's compounded by questions about whether you can ask people if they're vaccinated, and again, that's going to vary by state. So we worked it out, and we ended up with a protocol where you either had to be vaccinated or you had to wear a mask and have a COVID test the day before. And everyone kind of agreed to that, but and no one wanted to go to the judge. And so eventually we sorted it out, and the right result was achieved. But it's certainly an easy chance for people to, I think, frankly, take advantage of this situation if they want to, or try to take advantage.
Yeah, when Jeff was talking about there always being abuse, but new technologies create new opportunities for abuse, reminded me a little bit of the Houston Astros sign stealing from a couple of years ago.
Right.
Up to a limit level. But what do you do? You mentioned, with the vaccines. How do you think then about in-person jury selection, right? What do you want? How does that work? Because if you're not vaccinated, you can't sit in a jury. That would seem to skew the jury in interesting ways.
Yeah, I think interesting is a good word for it. Depending on the type of case, depending on the part of the country you're in, you could imagine that skew working in your favor or working against you. But certainly in a lot of the country, if you have a mandate that all jurors have to be vaccinated, you're excluding a lot of people, who otherwise would be eligible for jury service from the veneer. And it really is going to impact what your jury looks like. And, if you're, if the case has themes in it that, lend itself to defending on the ground of personal responsibility and not trusting the government or things like that, then maybe you want people on the jury who aren't who are I'm overgeneralizing and stereotyping, but maybe people who are not vaccinated would tend to be good defense jurors if that's your defense theme. On the other hand, if it's a pharma case or something like that, you could have concerns going the other way. So, I don't know what the right answer is. It depends on the case, depends on the jurisdiction. But I think there's a significant impact on jury selection from vaccination mandates and mask mandates. Similarly, I mean, there already, even before the pandemic, were of course lots of people who would come up with all sorts of creative ways to get out of being on a jury. And now that there are mask mandates in some places, a lot of people who are anti-mask are going to come up, even more so with creative ways to get out of being on a jury, if being on a jury would mean they had to wear a mask all day. So I think there are significant impacts that we're just beginning to see as courts open up and there are more in-person jury trials.
Yeah, on that latter point, I've definitely seen folks get out of jury with all kinds of creative issues. You've got kids at home who aren't vaccinated, which is obviously legitimate. They can't be, and because of that, I don't want to be on the jury. That you may skew a certain demographic out of your jury pool. I think at the end of the day, with what will the jury do, or how will this impact the jury? I think those questions, lawyers often have instincts, and we all have our thoughts. And you can game it out, as Jeff was saying. This kind of case, maybe I want this kind of juror who's a skeptical of the government, as what you think of as vaccine hesitancy for their reasons. On the other hand, you might not for others. I think the answer always is do good jury research, and you find surprising things, and you find things that don't necessarily comport with what people might think off the top of their head a jury will do. Frankly, the vaccine hesitancy right now, and we're getting ready for a jury, and we a jury trial, and we've worked with some jury consultants over the years who one of their favorite questions that's developed that we use is, do you believe the moon landing was faked? And this will shock you, the percentage of people who believe the moon landing was faked. It's a shockingly high percentage. It also happens to be that almost all the people who say they believe the moon landing are faked are people who will believe the most fantastical conspiracy theories. And if you have a case where you're trying to, often we're defending cases, we're trying to tamp down pretty wild conspiracy theories or things that plaintiffs' lawyers may be trying to argue. Companies. And they can weave a deep, dark conspiracy when really the company's doing the best it can, or there's an innocent explanation. Those who believe the moon landing was faked are not usually our friends on the jury. Turns out, so far, the research I've been seeing in at least some jurisdictions, there's a kind of a high correlation between people who have vaccine hesitancy and people who believe the moon landing was faked in some areas. Those might not be the kind of people, again, for similar reasons, who want to believe in conspiracies. Certainly if they believe that there's a chip in the vaccine or something like that, they may not be the kind of juror you would want for a lot of the kind of cases that I'm sure all of you are dealing with. But it's always jury research. These are all, it's easy, anybody can dream up a reason why a juror might be good or bad. Testing it will give you real data that can be actionable.
Makes sense to me. So we got a few more minutes here, and in terms of, the idea normally was to present audience questions toward the end. As you guys have seen, I've been sprinkling in my questions throughout, including questions from others. But in terms of the theory here being discussion of moving forward, what else are we seeing on the horizon now, in terms of, document discovery or types of cases or whatever else, what haven't we talked about yet that is on the horizon and maybe here to stay?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that are on the horizon that are worrisome. I mean, a lot of the things we've talked about so far, depending on the kind of case, depending on the relative resources of the parties, it could cut one way or could cut the other way, or maybe is more or less neutral just in terms of technological adaptations. But there are some things I think that are worth being worried about that are on the horizon. I think as courts, wake up and come back after the pandemic and find large backlogs, businesses that are defendants in those cases need to be worried about courts agreeing to creative ways that plaintiffs' lawyers will try to come up with to help clear those backlogs. That could be as simple as courts just not paying attention to pretrial motions. It takes time and resources to read a motion to dismiss that's complicated in a case that's technical. Same with, all the more so with the motion for summary judgment. And some courts, already, even before the pandemic, didn't really like dealing with motions like that and would rather just send a case to trial, trusting that usually that would make it settle and get it off their docket. And I think that's a real concern as courts, wake up to the backlogs that they're understandably facing. And I think there also could be, for similar reasons, concerns about what courts will do in response to plaintiffs' requests to consolidate multi-plaintiff cases in ways that, unfairly allow the plaintiffs to come up with a sort of perfect composite plaintiff and make it harder for the defendant to defend each of the cases that it's defending because they're all being defended at the same time. And plaintiffs' lawyers are going to try to sell that as a way to help clear backlogs and be more efficient. In practice, it may not be more efficient, maybe less efficient, as well as being unfair. But certain jurisdictions may be receptive to that. So I think there are things like that we should be worried about and be alert to, and do what we can to fight back on as we start seeing them.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I'll tell you one thing that keeps me up at night in any case, because it really just kills a case that's otherwise very meritorious or defensible. And that is document spoliation. It's like the worst, words you can hear in many cases as you're starting to get ready for a trial, and all of a sudden the other side decides that some documents weren't properly preserved. Can be huge sanctions, including loss of defenses or judgment on certain claims being awarded or stripped. And that's something that just keeps people up at night. It keeps in-house counsel up at night because there's been cases going back to the Bucholtz decision, others that really gone after in-house counsel, and obviously for outside counsel not to take care and ensure that things are done right. That's also a scary thing up there with missing a statute of limitations. We had gotten down our sort of e-discovery protocols, and we were sort of used to routines of early on in cases, meeting with witnesses, locking down their documents, collecting information from people on their individual phones, laptops, what have you. Obviously, at least the first few months of the pandemic, that was really hampered in many ways. Folks may recall back in the day when people were like spraying Lysol on their pizza and stuff like that. It was very difficult to say to someone, I'm going to show up at your house with some document people. We're going to come on in and look at your computer and suck the data out, et cetera. Everybody did the best they could, but we won't know for a while yet whether some of those efforts, the plaintiff's bar or any bar, I guess, will argue were insufficient, and whether you're going to have to deal with that. And so I think there's some things that were probably inevitably missed during those very hectic period last year, and if you have a case it's worth like going back and double checking, ensuring, and doing the best you can. It's never too late to at least address some of those issues. But I think that's something that we may see in the coming years as the life cycle of cases catch up to those kinds of arguments.
That's another good point. Well, thanks to both of you, Jeff and Andy. Really appreciate your time today. Good conversation, and good luck with all your cases.